at a level where you don't have to take a Tylenol when you finish. In other words, the guy is readable, he's accessible. He actually teaches at Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans.
Is that the press guy that made the movie from?
Brant Petrie is the fellow. It's very good, and it's the case for Jesus. What it does is it just goes through the scholarship, but it presents the scholarship in such a way that it's easy to read. And it identifies, like, for example, you'll hear things all the time. Well, the Gospels are anonymous. We don't know who wrote the Gospels. The critics will say that. But the interesting thing is, every manuscript that they've ever found, they all have, for the Gospels, at the top, they'll say that this Gospel was written by so-and-so. So there's a theory that we don't know that the Gospels are anonymous, but there's no data to back it up. No, and so anyway, that kind of stuff. This is just a really nice book to kind of give you if you will, a very complete view of the case for Jesus, about why he was why he was a historical figure, why this whole business. Because what we're actually doing, we're being asked essentially to believe what is almost unbelievable. And before we start about the next 40 days, before we start the resurrection, post-resurrection, I was watching a thing last night, and there was a gentleman who is his field of expertise is the history and the methods of crucifixion. This is what he has studied, his field of study. And it was interesting, grotesque, horrifying, all at the same time. The very first crucifixions took place by just simply impaling people on a pole. They'd run it through their pelvis area and just leave them there. Well, this went on it wasn't the Romans. The Romans saw this, and then they started working on their own systems of crucifixion. But particularly with the scourging. If you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ, you go, my God, how can anyone inflict so much punishment upon one man? The fact of the matter is that the depiction in the Passion of the Christ is probably a small sample of what actually occurred. Contrary to all the paintings and all the stuff that goes with it, Jesus did not wear a diaper in crucifixion. They stripped their victims naked, but this was the ultimate humiliation. But prior to that, they were scourged. They were scourged in such a way that the flagrum would wrap around so you could get both the top and the body. It was one on one side, one on the other side. So essentially head to toe. One of the things that, because in the literature that he studied and the examples that they have, they've discovered that one of the outcomes was genital mutilation. So that would, the amount of, the man that was walking to the cross with the crossbar on his shoulders would have scarcely been recognizable as human. Beat on the head with a cane, crown of thorns. And the interesting thing about the crown of thorns is that in the garden it says that you've screwed up, and because of that the earth will produce thorns. And now, and to sort of bring that back to the whole picture again, here's the crown of thorns on the man, God, who will eliminate the curse on the land. It's a very, I'm going to find it, I'm going to bring it for our study. It could easily be for both studies, but it's a very telling explanation of what the sacrifice was. So when it says in Hebrews, scorning the shame of the cross, you get a picture of what humiliation actually looks like. And it would be, we're going to publicly parade this man naked through the streets with a cross on his back, completely beat to pieces, head to toe. It was, and all of this as a way to alleviate suffering. It's almost an unbelievable story, and you really have to stop and consider how profound it is to take the next step. So now we're on the other side of the empty tomb. How would you have written the story? If this were a myth, if you were making it up, if I were doing it, I would have Jesus kind of like in the front of a parade, like the Easter parade, right? You know, where everybody's kind of walking down the street, triumphant and so forth and so on, and everybody. Well, they didn't do it that way. I mean, the appearances that we handed out, you can see they were spotty. They were here, they were there, they were to multiple audiences, and there were about 10 of them, 10 to 12, somewhere in there. I didn't put the appearances to Paul on there. But the way that it happened, the way that the Bible just simply describes what happens is really kind of smart, I guess, because it makes the person investigate further. It makes the person think about the reality of it. If it were just Jesus leading a parade down through the streets of Jerusalem, then you might start worshiping a different kind of Christ. Because the Christ that was beaten and humiliated and crucified and killed, you need to appreciate that Christ in order to appreciate the other side of the tomb. So the Bible starts with these encounters, right? The first one was Mary Magdalene. What was Mary Magdalene?
Prostitute.
Nope. That was a setup, and I apologize for that.
You took great joy in it.
In 591, the Pope preached a sermon where he confused this Mary with some other scenarios, conflated it, and turned this into a prostitute. There's nothing in Scripture that indicates Mary is a prostitute. There's a moral in this story, which is sometimes we tell what we think is true because we don't realize that the basis of what we are saying is wrong. Which means if all you do is listen to talking heads, you can be convinced of anything. That's why a book like this is so important. Because, well, I mean, I could go on a tangent here. Some churches, the abuse that goes on and the mind control that goes from the pulpit, that starts to work on the minds of the people. I can remember a long time ago, so this is not current by any means, but I can remember sitting in a church and the pastor telling the congregation, I think I need a Cadillac. He didn't specify whether she could be black, tan, white. I guess any color would do, but nevertheless, it had to be a Cadillac. Well, those sort of shenanigans is because people aren't listening, aren't really investigating what actually happened. So Mary Magdalene, right? She was afflicted with, the Scripture says, 7 demons. Literal 7? Maybe. But it also could be 7 is complete in the Bible. So 7 could have meant she was just a total wreck. Whatever it was, she probably had physical afflictions, she had spiritual afflictions, she had emotional afflictions. She was jacked up. And Jesus rid her of those problems, right? She was a mess. But then she was cleansed. So she, of all people, stepped out of this pit of defeat into, wow, there's something, there's hope here. And she became a follower. Probably she was a follower of means, which meant she may have been one of the support people that kind of helped to keep this caravan going for 3 years because they had to have money for food and so forth and so on. Somebody was there. And if you read the scriptures, and that's why I gave them to you, because you kind of build them in stereo, because one gives a little detail, another one gives another little detail. There were some other women, and one of them was named Joanne, who was also one of the women at the... So this was a group of people, a party of followers that had been with her, and Mary Magdalene was one of them. Well, she was going to anoint the body for the proper burial. Typically, crucifixions didn't take place on Friday, but this one did. The reason they didn't take place on Friday was because Saturday was the Sabbath, Shabbat. Can't have no unclean person hanging around up there. We got to get them down from the pole. So if there was going to be a crucifixion on a Friday, we typically would need to have a quick death in order to remove the body. That's when they broke the legs. If you were crucified on a Sunday, you could just stay up there for days because they were perfectly happy to let the birds peck on you or whatever, if you were low enough, to have wild dogs try to just consume. This was because this was a public humiliation. This can happen to you, right? So they were going to anoint the body on a Friday. Well, we know that they didn't have to break the legs of Jesus because he was already dead. Now they've found ossuaries, bone boxes, that when they've opened these boxes, they've actually had broken fibulas and tibias in there. Someone broke their legs. These were crucified people. This was a rarity. It's a possibility that could have been the thief on the cross. That's how rare this would be, because we're perfectly, it doesn't cost us to let you suffer. They were just willing to indulge, if you will, the Jewish tradition. Hey, we'll kill them. We'll get them down off the cross. Sure. Just don't bother us, right? So it was that kind of thing. Mary's going to anoint the body for final burial. She shows up at the tomb, and this is kind of a conglomeration of all the stories. And she's like, who took the body? And an angel says, what are you looking for? And she's like, it's not here. Tell me where it's at, so I can go find it. Because this was going to be a problem, because if you waited much longer, what was going to happen to the body? It was decomposing to the point that you no longer knew who it was. We don't have the body in the tomb. And the Jewish tradition is a year later, after the body has died and been placed in the tomb, the Jewish tradition would be to come back a year later, take the bones and put them in a bone box, an ossuary, and that's where the final resting place would be. If we can't find the body, we can't do that. There won't be any year anniversary of the death. So she says, where's he at? Because I got to go get him because time's running out. And then she sees this guy that's the gardener. And she says, where did they take him? And who are you looking for? I'm looking for Jesus. And then she hears a voice. And, one of the strange things is that in today's world, they can take AI and they've actually made a fake of your voice, let's say, and they call your daughter and they say, I've got your son or daughter, or I've got your father, your mother, and you're going to need to do this and do that, and pay me this or that, or and they have nothing. It's just a fake. Very hard to tell the difference in the fake, but if you listen carefully, you can still tell because they can't do it perfectly. Well, when it's your voice, you don't have to fake anything. When she hears Mary, she realized there's only one person that talks like this, and because she had been with him for 3 days. And so she calls out, Rabbi, teacher. And Jesus says, go tell my brothers. So the moral of that story is it really pays to know the voice of the one who's calling you. Because if you don't, and Jesus often used the portrait of the shepherd. The sheep know my voice. And if you've ever seen videos of sheep that have been herded by shepherds, If you're not the right shepherd, you can sit out there and holler all day long, and the sheep are just like, this guy's an idiot. I don't know what he wants, and I could care less. If it's the sheep's shepherd, when the shepherd calls, the sheep come because they recognize the shepherd's voice. Well, in today's world, there's so many times where the shepherd's calling, and we just don't recognize the voice. It's important to know the voice that calls from the open tomb. So that was the first one. Now the other one, right shortly after that, was the rest of the women. It says Mother Mary. So that was Mary, the traditional, the Mary we think of, the mother of Jesus, Salome, Joanna, and it says, and the women. So we don't know who else, but what we do know is all we are dealing with is XY chromosomes. The women are the first to visit the tomb. Now, if this was my story and I was making it up, that would be the last thing I would do, because that is such an absolute embarrassment to the story. Why? Because women didn't have any legal standing whatsoever in that Jewish tradition. Nevertheless, the rest of the women see Jesus. And they go back and tell the disciples. But the disciples, because the last thing they were doing was sitting around going, hey, you know what? I think it's been 3 days. There's about to be a resurrection. There was nothing like that on their mind at all. So Luke 24 says this: when they, the women, came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. So there were some others there besides the 11, but the 11 are the primary audience, if you will. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this. So a group of women come running back from the tomb to tell the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Well, of course they did. What are you trying to tell me? You went and found the tomb open, and when you found the tomb open, now you're trying to tell me that Jesus spoke to you? What? Sometimes that's the kind of way that we actually have to process information. Peter, however, and another description of it says that there was also John, but Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. Another thing is that there's documents that have just been discovered recently about grave robbers during the time of Jesus. And you think, my gosh, nothing's changed. People were just as greedy and grubby and disgusting, if you will, as this is man, right? But grave robbers would go in and they wouldn't steal the body because the body's worth nothing. They'd steal the shroud because the shroud was linen and this thing could be of so much. So they would take the linen and leave the body. And the little document says, you got to be on the lookout for these people because they're bad news, they're bad business, and so forth. Well, now you enter the tomb, and it doesn't make sense because the body's gone, but the shroud's there. What would a robber do? It's the other way around. You'd find a naked body with the shroud gone, but no. The moral of that story, sometimes it is wise to investigate what you do not believe is possible. It doesn't mean you fall for it. It doesn't mean you just trip over it. But it does mean maybe I need to rethink this. Because if you would have simply stuck with the conclusion that was the obvious conclusion, you would have told the women, you're nuts, and that's the end of it. But the fact that it caused enough discomfort to investigate, then things started to change. Peter didn't figure it out yet, but he was definitely starting to go, all right, there's something going on here. So the road to Emmaus, all this is happening very quickly. Two men are walking on the road. When they finally figured out who they were talking to, they were amazed. Jesus even took the time to educate them, to explain that the correct understanding of the Scriptures was pointing to Him. The Christ, that to understand what they had had for thousands of years boiled down to this. The Christ that was to come in the Old Testament was now here. Didn't you know that beginning with Moses and the prophets, the Christ had to die? And beginning with the Scriptures, they started pointing that out. He was educating them. Well, the spiritual journey is a walk, just like the walk to Emmaus. And the spiritual journey, if it is carried out, even these guys were in the midst of confusion, but they were smart enough to listen to the man and his voice. And then they realized, oh, there's more to this story. Sometimes the path is clear. Sometimes we know where to go, or we think we do. Sometimes it doesn't even seem like a path. It is those times when you don't know where you are going. It is critical to trust the one you are following. We tend to get into these situations where we don't know the answer, and yet now we start devising answers, and come to find out the answer wasn't really what you thought it was. The house didn't burn down because there was a path that needed to be completed in order to make the house safe. If a cheap little repair would have been done, who knows how long that would have lasted. And now we're in a situation. So the point being is that we're all on a path, a spiritual path. Sometimes we see the way, sometimes we can't see the way, but we always have someone to follow. Now that doesn't mean that you're not going to make mistakes, because Paul and Barnabas got in an argument, and Paul was like, well, you go your way and I'll go my way. They didn't have a clear picture of what was the path. But because they were both earnestly trying to find a way, ultimately that reconciled. And that's what will happen. Even if things go sideways for a while, it will harmonize if you're following the path. Or if it doesn't harmonize, it will be because somebody doesn't recognize what the path is and they want to make their own path. And you see that happen all the time, where somebody manipulates somebody. Really bad. God told me that you were supposed to do ... Really. Because God hadn't said anything to me. There's one circumstance that I can recall again. A long time ago, a fellow walked into an office and said, God's leading me to start a church. And the pastor said, well, God isn't telling me that at all. And the guy said, well, one of us has to be wrong. And the answer is, maybe both of you are wrong. Because maybe you want to start a church for the wrong reason, and maybe you don't want him to start a church for the wrong reason. These are not simple deals. People who think, and I don't mean to make this flippant, but people who think that their relationship with God is so close that they know every little detail they're supposed to do, be careful. Because my experience has been, it's a small, still voice, and you're expected to learn from it, but you aren't led by it to the extent that you cannot veer from the path. There was Peter, private meeting. Private meeting. It's mentioned in passing in Luke 24 that Jesus had a private meeting with Peter. And man, we don't know what was said. It's just in passing. But we do know what was said in a later meeting with Peter. The Sea of Galilee, which is mentioned later in the thing about the 7 disciples. 2 times, Peter was asked if he had agape love for Jesus. Agape love is full-on commitment. Peter's answer was, well, I have phileo love. Phileo love is kind of like a brotherly kind of love. So he's asked the first time. He said, well, yes, I love you. Well, then feed my sheep. He was asked the second time. Now he's getting a little bit twisty. He said, well, yes, take care of my sheep. Take care of the flock. So Peter had this deal where he was being told, it's not about you anymore, cowboy. It's not about ego. It's not about pride. It's not about who's the greatest, which they tended to have arguments about a few times in their history. Now it's more about, I'm sending you out. When you get sent out, you have to be strong enough to take the bullets, because they're coming. And the third time, Jesus asked, he asked, not as agape. The third time, Jesus also used phileo. And that's when I think Peter got it. He said, oh, he was asking me in the most profound way that he can, and now the third time he's asking me in a way that I am trying to respond. Because this is what Scripture says. When it says it in John, he says he understood all that. He said, yes, I am committed. He said, well, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. In other words, you did what you wanted to do and you went where you wanted to go. You figured out what success was and you went for it. But now that you're older, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Those are unpleasant, difficult words. That you're going to die a not so pleasant death, and it's going to glorify God. This isn't a weekend at the spa where when you come out, whew, Vietnamese Jesus did my nails and I got my hair done and everything is all right. I'm going back next week to check out Spa Jesus again. I'm going to come out just as good. It's nothing like that at all. It is, look, the older you get, the wiser you get, the more committed you become, the more you are able to take care of those who need you. And it may get to the point in Peter's case where he said, get ready, because the death you die is going to be for my glory. But then and after telling someone that, hey, later on you're going to die, follow me. Wow. But he was challenging Peter, and he was challenging him straight up. Do you love me? So the moral of this story, that which is of the utmost importance deserves the utmost commitment. If it's important, you should be committed. If it's not, you're not going to be. 3 times. Why 3 times? Well, first of all, I think it was redundancy to bring to the fact that this is going to be your mission. This is going to be, I'm telling you, this is going to be your mission. But it's also an interesting anti-parallel to Peter's denials. I don't know him. I don't know him. I told you I don't know him. Levels of denial that went up to the ultimate denial. Levels of agreeing that I commit that led to the ultimate commitment. The completely opposite of each other. That's the difference in a pre-resurrection Peter and a post-resurrection Peter. Something clicked, something changed, something completely unwrapped his original worldview and turned it into something else. You can try to describe that. You can try to explain that with something other than a resurrection. You can say that Peter hallucinated. Well, then so did the other 11 and the women. And they hallucinated something that they weren't even thinking was going to happen. You can't hallucinate something you're not familiar with. We've been through all that. That dog won't hunt. The only way you can describe it is, I saw that man dead. I went in that tomb. I saw that man's bedclothes where they off to the side. Nobody stolen anything. And then I met him. That's why I'm committed. If you abandon commitment, then to some extent you also abandon Christ. You go, oh, does that mean I'm going to hell? No, it means just like Peter, you're going to be restored. We've all been called back because Jesus' love is agape love. It's the deepest kind of love there is. We want to get by with a little less love. You know, I love them, but man, I don't want to have to deal with their problems. That's not the same level of commitment. If you want your life and your death to glorify God, it's all in. It's no halfway. People fear death. People run from death. And that is partly due because no one has ever come back from death except one. And we've heard some of the near-death experiences that some people have had, and they're very profound. But the bottom line is, as you approach that moment, you are trusting that everything I believe is correct. You can't approach that moment with just a heart belief. You cannot be an effective Christian if you only have a head belief. You know, that's the ones who sit around in seminary and discuss seminary things, right? And they went to Oz, and the wizard gave them a THD, a doctorate of thinkology. But it's not applied. The head gives the heart the application. If you don't know what you know, then you cannot be all in. And you're going to need to be all in when that time approaches, because you don't have any cards left to play. The apostles. 10 of them saw Jesus. We often hear about the doubting Thomas, but one of the things we don't realize is that the 10 were given what Thomas asked for beforehand. It says they were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your mind? Look at my hands and feet. It is me. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones." They didn't know what it had, but they knew something is standing here. Okay, he looks like Jesus. He talks like Jesus. My gosh, what do I do with this? Is it a ghost? Is this a specter? What in the world? And Jesus says, well, here, check out the wounds. There they are. And so there was physical, because sometimes what we tend to be is we tend to be physical. If I can't see it and I can't touch it and I can't taste it, then it's not real. And boy, you can overplay that. But that's where they were. And so he said, well, how about this? And he offered them proof. Tangible proof. Concrete proof. When he said that, he showed them their hands and feet. And while they still did not believe it, but now it was because of joy and amazement. So recognize that. This would have been where you win the lottery, right? Or something tremendously wonderful happens to you, and the person says, I can't believe it. It was that kind of just, oh my goodness, absolute amazement, astonishment, joy. And then he asked, do you have anything here to eat? And that was pretty obvious. First of all, it says that in his resurrected body, he still had needs. He could eat. He was hungry. It also says, ghosts don't eat fish. Ghosts don't bite bread. The one that's standing in front of you is in body, a resurrected body, but is in the same that you recognize. So in other words, we can do away with all the possibilities that are going through your mind right now about what in the world happened. There's only one explanation. I have risen. 8 days later, Thomas was with them. He's heard all this stuff, and he's kind of like, you guys, because if you're expecting me to believe, I need to see some proof. So now we've learned how to call Thomas the doubter. Well, I don't think he was a doubter. I think he was just simply asking for what the others had already received. And when he was confronted with the evidence, when he saw Jesus, and Jesus said, "Well, here, touch the wounds. What about the wound in my side? Touch that." Thomas,
Are you okay? No, she's not. She's shaking.
Oh God.
She's still.
Okay.
put it up.